One of my favourite episodes of Disenchantment is Part 3, Episode 6, Last Splash. It's almost like a bottle episode, mostly taking place on a boat in the middle of the ocean as Princess Tiabini, or Bean for short, and Elfo attempt to return to Dreamland, joined by the mermaid Mora. There's a lot to like here, some really beautiful visuals, a character focus on Bean that works, largely due to some genuine chemistry between her and Mora, a sort of ambiguous ending that also deals an emotional gut punch, all capped off with humour that largely lands.
Ow! Oh, did you just smack me on the bum-bum? I hope that doesn't happen again. I said, I hope it doesn't happen again.
But a lot of these successes, and indeed the core of this episode, can only work due to an intelligent bit of writing, which sees the writers pull off something of a stealth retcon. The story at the heart of Last Splash is Bean and Mora's budding romance. It takes a while for Bean to even realise it herself, but she discovers that she likes girls, and particularly that she likes Mora. This is an episode in which we're shown a great amount of internal turmoil in Bean, getting to the roots of what's been emotionally driving her all along. And together with Bean, the viewer sees things slowly start to click into place, sees insecurities and defense mechanisms slowly fall away, and generally go on a roller coaster of a journey, the aftermath of which changes her character in a lasting way. But some of the information we're given in Last Splash, which grounds this emotional arc, seems directly contradictory to stuff we've been told and shown before. And this is because this episode is also the climax of a readjustment the show had been making for a while, what might be described as a long-term retcon. For anyone out of the loop on this particular bit of nerd speak, retcon is short for retroactive continuity, and refers to the action by which a work of fiction alters established facts with new information that deliberately creates a new interpretation of previous events. These happen most commonly in comic books, which is to be expected given that these days most big-name comic books are dealing with decades of established lore. In serialized storytelling, the longer something goes on, the more likely it is that any given story a writer wants to tell will in some way contradict or go against the spirit of something which has already happened. With how franchise-heavy Hollywood is at the moment though, we're also seeing more and more retcons on the big screen. Look no further than 29's biggest cinematic disappointment, Star Wars Episode 9, in which we discover that Emperor Palpatine's iconic death 30 years ago never happened.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
So retcons can be infuriating. But retcons aren't always a bad thing. If you've seen any of the X-Men films, you're probably familiar with the villain Magneto. You're probably also familiar with retcons, because that franchise is full of really shoddy ones, but most people today would agree that one of Magneto's most interesting and essential qualities is his backstory as a victim of the Holocaust, which humanises his radical actions and adds some moral depth to his conflict with the X-Men. Except, surprise, surprise, that wasn't originally the case. That Holocaust backstory was retconned in, years and years later. And I think Disenchantment shows us another rare example of the elusive good retcon. Let's cast our minds back to the start of Disenchantment. Remember, Disenchantment is a graining adult cartoon, very much in the vein of something like Futurama. And I think the showrunners anticipated the degree of skepticism with which some people viewed the idea of this show, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the first part. Actually, you know what, I'm just going to call them seasons, because come on, that's what they are. But in the first season, and particularly in the first few episodes, the show feels like it's very eager to prove that animated fantasy can be mature too, which means lots of drinking, dirty jokes, implied cartoon nudity, and what seems to be a promiscuous main character, who we're told, gets around a bit.
Great. I have to wear this crazy veil and pretend I'm a virgin?
It's not a veil, Mum. It's your corset.
I think some of the show's eagerness to embrace aspects like the above comes down to the state of modern adult animation. Since the prime of The Simpsons and Futurama, some of the more popular entries in the genre have been shows like Rick and Morty, Archer, BoJack Horseman, and even, Big Mouth. Of course, you don't need to hammer subjects like these, which might have been a little more taboo 20 years ago, to be good adult animation, but early episodes of Disenchantment do sort of feel like they have something to prove. And maybe as a result of this, Bean's sexuality is a focus often, like in episode 4, which revolves almost entirely around a very eager Bean trying unsuccessfully to get some, male company. But I think the writers realised something early on, that this didn't really work for the show. Not that there was anything massively wrong with it. While the early episode scripts are, I think, weaker than what we'd get in later seasons, they're fine really, and Abby Jacobson's performance as Bean is great as always. But in overtly trying to assert Disenchantment's credentials as a modern 2010s adult animation, the protagonist as hypersexual debauchee trope ended up running the risk of going too far, and making Disenchantment feel too much like everything else. And I'm not just being a prude here, I think there's other examples of this dynamic, aspects that the show would later try to walk back. But the reason I'm talking about this one is that the way the show pivots away from the trope is what eventually leads us to Last Splash and Bean's relationship with Mora. This pivot is visible by the time we get to season 2, as the writers make a few subtle course corrections, which won't fully pay off until much later. One of these is aborting the will they won't they tension between Bean and Elfo, which was a fairly big part of these characters' bond in the first season, culminating in a fairly drugged up kiss. This dynamic falls away in favour of a deep friendship, and crucially, while Elfo still seems infatuated with Bean at times, there's really no hint of reciprocation to be found after this point. We also see markedly fewer romantic or amorous moments with Bean in season 2. She doesn't really show interest in any of the available male characters which pop up, like she did in season 1. She does have a pretty great time on Mermaid Island though, which seems like nothing at first, but is called back to in Last Splash. And this reframes what might be a throwaway moment into foreshadowing an openness on Bean's part to female intimacy.
First Safiria, now Mora?
What are you talking about?
Oh, so I guess Bean didn't tell you about her late-night earlobe nibbling escapade?
There's also a similar moment in the Ursula episode, which only becomes clear as foreshadowing with the benefit of hindsight. Importantly though, in these examples, as well as with the biker lady in Steamland near the season's end, Bean seems completely oblivious to this side of herself. All Bean notices throughout this period is related to the audience only in Last Splash.
But then why is it not leading to dating? I don't know. No, I mean, I've never dated anyone. Hey Bean, why are you so lonely? I don't know, maybe because nobody loves me.
The thing groaning shows have always done best is character. So when Disenchantment realises that having the license to explore mature themes doesn't necessarily mean it has to right away in the typical manner, it's sort of to be expected that the second stab the writers take at exploring Bean's sexuality is more nuanced, gradual, and tied intrinsically to her character's development over the next 2 seasons. So when Bean realises that she's into women, maybe exclusively, maybe she's bisexual, or maybe she falls somewhere else within the realms of queerdom, it reframes a lot of her previous interactions, and as a result of this groundwork that's been laid all throughout seasons 2 and 3, it feels like a natural progression to her character, and it doesn't feel at all like a retcon, even though technically it definitely is.
Great, I have to wear this crazy veil and pretend I'm a virgin? I have done like so much with so many people and like kissed and touched stuff and like, I don't know. I haven't done any of those things. I have kissed a bunch of people and animals.
So that's how you pull off a successful retcon. Step 1. As is often the mistake, the retcon shouldn't just be done to introduce a cool new idea which doesn't line up with established continuity. No, a successful retcon explains or fixes something that was already an issue. Here, that's the generic and uninteresting love life of Season 1 Bean. When this aspect of her is reframed in Last Splash, it reveals a real genuine interiority to the character that isn't that present in the promiscuous bravado of her earlier self. Step 2. A retcon should not contradict existing facts or events, it should reframe them. In Disenchantment's case, Bean saying this,
great, I have to wear this crazy veil and pretend I'm a virgin,
is now understood not as a plot hole or an inconsistency, but as a lie, a defense mechanism Bean throws up to avoid having to talk about or think about the curious way she's never managed to get properly close to anyone. Step 3. A retcon shouldn't happen all at once, it needs to be built up to. That's why Disenchantment drops breadcrumbs, hints, and gradually pivots before hitting us with Last Splash. It's not whiplash, it feels natural. And step 4 is that the result of the retcon needs to be worth it. Don't invalidate an entire series of movies for one feeble climax. J.J. Abrams! And Disenchantment ticks this box as well. Last Splash is a beautiful episode, and personally that last scene where Bean walks away, never seeing the star necklace on the beach, is a blow that makes me feel just as dead inside as Futurama's Jurassic Bark. Disenchantment has been criticised for its inconsistent quality, and I think that's fair. There's definitely issues with the show and its writing, but its best moments, like Last Splash, show us that there's a really strong character core to this show, and that when the writers hit, they hit hard. And it also shows how to pull off a retcon successfully, which is a rarer feat than you might think. I've been wanting to make this video essay for a while, so if you're watching it, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear your take on this episode, or my argument, or any other examples of really good or really bad retconning. Leave them below, and oh yeah, the Disenchantment writers actually contacted me and said that if you don't leave a like on this video, then Season 4 is just going to be all one long graphic sequence of Elfo getting it on with that boat from Last Splash, so I guess if you don't want that, you'll have to drop a thumbs up. Sorry, but I don't make the rules. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks for watching, and I hope I see you again soon.